It seems almost unjust when you consider it. You refine your diet, monitor your caloric intake, and perhaps even forego that extra slice of bread. Your face appears leaner, your arms become more defined, and the numbers on the scale decrease. Yet that stubborn abdominal fat remains, seemingly oblivious to your efforts. This feels particularly acute because it feels personal, as though your own physiology is deliberately clinging to the area you most wish to change. However, the true explanation is far more intricate and human than mere genetic predisposition or insufficient effort. That soft layer surrounding your midsection is not merely an accumulation of excess energy. It acts more like a dynamic system, reacting to hormonal fluctuations, stress, and unconscious survival cues. Your abdomen is not resisting your endeavors. It is responding to your biological makeup. If you have ever experienced frustration, embarrassment, or discouragement, watching every other part of your body transform except your waistline, you are not alone. Over half of adults in the US over 45 exhibit this exact pattern. Weight decreases, but inches do not. Yet once you comprehend why the body treats abdominal fat distinctly, why it safeguards it, defends it, and refuses to release it until specific conditions are met, you begin to perceive the entire weight loss journey from a profoundly different perspective. To grasp this journey fully, we must revert to the precise moment you initiated caloric restriction. What most people fail to realize is that abdominal fat is not a passive entity. It actively responds to signals your body has been transmitting for years. In essence, your midsection functions less as a storage closet and more as a tightly secured biological vault, guarding organs that your body deems indispensable. Consequently, the instant you begin to consume less, your abdomen does not immediately activate fat burning. Instead, it signals, "Hold on, something is changing. Let's not access the emergency reserves just yet." This protective instinct is not a defect. It is evolution fulfilling its intended purpose. Your ancestors endured droughts, severe winters, and prolonged periods of unreliable food sources because their bodies developed the ability to defend the most strategically important energy zones. Abdominal fat was never intended for aesthetic purposes. It was a form of biological insurance. Therefore, when you feel your waistline is resisting your efforts, it is not an act of defiance, but biology striving to preserve your existence as it always has. However, this is where the narrative becomes intriguing. Once you comprehend the regulations governing this biological vault, you can finally begin to unlock it. This understanding is initiated the moment your body perceives the initial reduction in energy intake. And as perplexing as this might currently seem, the reassuring news is that your body adheres to a discernible, predictable, and remarkably adaptable pattern once you finally grasp it. In the ensuing moments, you will discover precisely how that pattern unfolds. When the body decides to cease its alarm, when it genuinely commences fat burning, and what silently impedes so many from ever achieving this state. This is because reducing calories does not automatically trigger a fat-burning mode. Your biological system possesses its own specific criteria, and the instant you learn how this checklist operates, everything starts to make sense. When you initially reduce your caloric intake, your body does not instantaneously switch to melting abdominal fat. What actually transpires is far less dramatic and significantly more human. Your brain registers the energy deficit as a subtle disturbance, an unforeseen variation in your routine. Its primary reaction is not to incinerate fat, but to stabilize the system. This explains why the initial phase of a diet can feel unexpectedly invigorating for some individuals. Your liver commences the release of stored glycogen, the readily accessible fuel your body maintains for precisely such situations. Consider it your metabolism's backup battery, activated before it even contemplates accessing stored fat. And for many, this is precisely where the misconception begins. Take Linda, for instance, a 62-year-old who embarked on a moderate caloric deficit believing she was finally implementing all the correct strategies. After 2 days, she stepped onto the scale and observed a nearly 3-pound reduction. She felt a surge of pride and optimism. However, what she was unaware of was that she had not yet burned a single pound of fat. She had merely depleted glycogen and the water associated with it. This is not a setback. It is the preliminary phase, the period when your body endeavors to buy time and ascertain whether this energy shortage is temporary or a genuine metabolic shift. And this decision fundamentally dictates all subsequent physiological responses. As your glycogen reserves diminish, another process unfolds beneath the surface, one that almost every individual misinterprets as genuine progress. Glycogen is not stored in isolation. For every gram your body retains, it binds approximately 3 to 4 grams of water. When glycogen is consumed, that water is expelled along with it. This accounts for the rapid, sometimes astonishingly swift decrease on the scale during the initial days. It feels miraculous, as though you have unlocked some secret fat-burning mechanism. However, the reality is far more prosaic. It is not yet fat loss. It is water being discharged from your system. This distinction is crucial, because if you fail to comprehend it, you will misconstrue the entire journey. This exact scenario occurred with Linda. She was not losing 3 pounds of fat. She was shedding water that her body no longer required once her glycogen stores began to empty. And here lies the interesting turn. That initial drop is actually a positive indicator, not because it signifies fat burning, but because it signals that your insulin levels are finally starting to decline. Lower insulin is the first genuine green light your body grants before it considers accessing stored fat. However, that green light does not illuminate instantly. It appears later, once your body has concluded whether this caloric deficit constitutes a transient anomaly or a permanent change. Just as you believe things are progressing favorably, the scale stagnates. Not an ounce is lost. Sometimes it even inches back up. For most people, this is the moment when their spirits plummet. The initial enthusiasm wanes, doubt creeps in, and they feel as though they are back to square one. However, what feels like an impasse is, in reality, a critical metabolic undertaking. This early plateau does not signify your body giving up. It signifies recalibration. After expending glycogen and water, your system pauses to reevaluate the situation. Is this caloric deficit a fleeting incident, a skipped meal here or there? Or is it a consistent pattern that necessitates a more profound adjustment in energy management? Linda encountered this precise barrier at the close of her first week. Her weight remained unchanged for 4 consecutive days, and she panicked, convinced all her efforts were futile. But what she did not realize was that her body was finally stabilizing after the rapid loss of water. And this stabilization is essential because your metabolism will not transition into deeper fat-burning territory until it perceives a sense of security. This hiatus is not a stop sign. It is a checkpoint that directly precedes the next phase. If you maintain consistency, once your body confirms that the caloric deficit is not a temporary phenomenon, it subtly transitions into what scientists term metabolic adaptation. While the term may sound daunting, the reality is remarkably straightforward. Your metabolism is learning how to protect you. As energy intake remains low, your body becomes marginally more efficient. It begins to conserve fuel, reduce non-essential processes, and adjust hormones such as ghrelin and leptin to maintain your alertness to food. This explains why hunger can unexpectedly intensify, even if your meals have remained constant. It is not a sign of weakness. It is your biology reminding you that survival has always depended on acquiring sufficient energy. Linda experienced this during her second week. Without warning, she became hungrier at night, more restless in the early morning, and surprisingly fatigued after brief walks. She assumed her metabolism had slowed down. However, what was actually occurring was far more strategic. Her body was not shutting down. It was reorganizing its energy budget, ensuring that essential functions were maintained, while it determined whether fat reserves should finally be accessed. This slight slowdown is not detrimental news. In fact, it is one of the clearest indications that your body is poised to enact a more significant metabolic shift. And that shift, the one everyone strives so diligently to attain, is the next stage. If there is one aspect of this journey that most people remain unaware of, it is the intricate hormonal dialogue underpinning every decision your body makes. This is because fat loss, particularly abdominal fat loss, is not solely about calories. It is about chemistry. And three specific hormones quietly dictate whether your body incinerates fat or sequesters it like a securely locked vault. The first is insulin, the energy storage hormone. When insulin levels are elevated, typically due to frequent snacking, sugary foods, or decades of oscillating blood sugar, your body simply refuses to release stored fat. It is akin to attempting to open a safe while the lock remains engaged. Only when insulin begins to consistently decline does fat even become a viable option for energy. Then there is cortisol, the stress hormone. Cortisol not only influences fat storage, but also determines where fat is stored. And its preferred site is the abdomen. High stress, insufficient sleep, extended work days, late-night caffeine consumption. All these factors transmit the same signal: protect the core. This explains the prevalence of cortisol belly, particularly among adults over 50. Finally, there is leptin, the hormone that signals to your brain that you have consumed adequate sustenance. When leptin is balanced, cravings diminish, hunger feels predictable, and fat loss becomes more attainable. However, when leptin is disrupted, often due to chronic dieting or poor sleep, your hunger signals become more pronounced, chaotic, and difficult to regulate. Linda experienced this entire hormonal triad without even realizing it. She was not merely contending with caloric intake. She was battling insulin that required time to decrease, cortisol stemming from years of demanding schedules, and leptin confused by established dietary habits. Until these three hormones establish a new equilibrium, the fat-burning mode simply will not activate. However, once these factors align, once insulin's hold weakens, cortisol's alarm subsides, and leptin achieves equilibrium, the inner mechanisms unlock. That is the moment genuine transformation commences. As your hormones progressively stabilize, a remarkable yet understated shift begins. Your metabolism, which had been cautiously exploring its capabilities, transitions from a steady reliance on glucose to utilizing stored fat. This phenomenon, termed metabolic flexibility by researchers, represents a pivotal turning point in the entire process. It's not flashy or dramatic, but profoundly impactful. As glycogen stores remain depleted, your liver starts converting sequestered fat into ketones, a purer, more consistent energy source that your brain and muscles readily favor. Many individuals experience this without recognizing its significance. They report waking up with enhanced mental clarity, sustained energy levels throughout the day, and the disappearance of late afternoon slumps. The insistent cravings for sugar diminish. This is the initial indication that your body is finally entering a fat-burning state. Linda experienced this phenomenon before fully comprehending it. One morning, she realized she hadn't considered food until nearly midday. This wasn't due to restriction, but rather a fundamental change in her hunger cues. Her body was no longer demanding immediate gratification. It was learning to perform on a deeper energy reserve. Yet, this is where the narrative becomes more intricate. This metabolic shift manifests at varying times for different individuals, ranging from as early as 4 days to up to 2 full weeks, influenced by elements such as stress levels, insulin sensitivity, sleep patterns, and dietary history. Despite these individual differences, one truth remains constant. Once metabolic flexibility is established, your body gains the capacity to burn fat in a manner it hasn't in years. What transpires next elucidates why visible fat, particularly abdominal fat, appears to be the most recalcitrant. The surprising aspect for most is that once your body becomes adaptable enough to utilize fat as fuel, it doesn't initially target the fat visible in the mirror. Instead, it prioritizes the unseen fat. Deep within your abdomen resides visceral fat, a hazardous type that encases vital organs like your liver, pancreas, and intestines. Due to its metabolically active nature and abundance of signaling receptors, this fat incinerates considerably faster than subcutaneous fat, the soft layer beneath your skin. Scientists estimate that visceral fat can reduce up to 3 times quicker than the superficial belly fat that frequently preoccupies people. Consequently, while you may scrutinize your waistline and perceive no change, a significant internal process is underway. Your organs are actually improving in health even before your reflection shows any discernible difference. Linda was unaware of this internal recalibration. Her physician, however, observed improvements in her fasting glucose, a decrease in cholesterol levels, and a reduction in inflammation markers long before her clothing felt looser. Your body inherently prioritizes survival over aesthetic concerns. Therefore, it first targets the dangerous fat that poses a threat to your long-term well-being. Only after this critical layer begins to diminish does your body start drawing from subcutaneous fat, the pinchable fat on your lower abdomen that often seems impossible to eliminate. This explains why belly fat appears so obstinate. It is not the first fat to be burned, but virtually the last. Nevertheless, once the stage is reached, the visible alterations occur more rapidly than anticipated. Even after your body gains the ability to burn fat, the speed and sustained nature of this process hinge on the seemingly minor daily decisions you make. People often conceptualize fat loss as a mathematical equation, but in reality, it's a rhythmic interplay of movement, rest, and stress. Let's begin with movement. Strength training goes beyond muscle development. It elevates your body's caloric expenditure, even during periods of inactivity like sitting, driving, or sleeping. Muscle tissue is metabolically demanding, and a greater muscle mass means your body extracts more energy from stored fat without any additional conscious effort. High-intensity interval training introduces another dimension. The afterburn effect, which can persist for 24 to 36 hours, keeps your metabolism elevated long after the workout concludes. However, even simple physical activity holds significance. Walking, gentle cycling, gardening, and household chores, these forms of non-exercise activity thermogenesis, NEAT, quietly contribute to a greater calorie burn throughout the day than most individuals realize. Next is sleep, an element frequently overlooked until its absence is keenly felt. During deep sleep, your body inherently recalibrates hunger hormones, mends tissues, and regulates cortisol levels. Deprive yourself of these crucial hours and you'll experience increased cravings, diminished patience, and persistent belly fat, irrespective of how judiciously you eat. Stress completes this intricate triad. Elevated cortisol serves as a powerful biochemical signal, prompting your body to store fat, particularly around the midsection. Linda was baffled by her persistent late-night carbohydrate cravings. However, it wasn't a deficit of willpower. It was cortisol, a consequence of years of demanding work shifts, late-night coffee, and disrupted sleep cycles. These lifestyle elements don't merely influence fat loss, they actively direct it. They determine whether your body feels secure enough to release fat or compelled to retain it. Collectively, they clarify why the fat you most desire to shed often remains intractable until one final biological barrier is overcome. Even with meticulous habits, caloric regulation, improved sleep, and optimized training, abdominal fat often proves to be the last to recede. There's a biological underpinning for this stubbornness. The fat situated around your midsection possesses fewer beta-adrenergic receptors, which are responsible for releasing fat into the bloodstream for utilization. Simply put, Your abdomen doesn't interpret fat-burning signals as effectively as other bodily regions. Furthermore, blood flow to abdominal fat is diminished compared to areas like your arms or legs. Since fat can only be burned when transported away by blood, poor circulation translates to slow progress, regardless of your efforts. However, the narrative runs deeper, particularly for individuals over 50. Years of elevated insulin, chronic stress, disturbed sleep, and hormonal fluctuations, especially during menopause or andropause, designate the midsection as the body's preferred storage site. From a biological perspective, the abdomen isn't merely an aesthetic concern. It's a strategic reserve. Linda learned this through a challenging experience. Her face became leaner, her legs more toned, and her energy levels increased, yet her waistline showed negligible change. It wasn't a lack of discipline, but her physiology prioritizing survival over appearance. Once you grasp that belly fat is the last fat your body is willing to release, the frustration begins to dissipate as you finally understand your body's inherent rationale. So, the eagerly anticipated question is this: when does tangible abdominal fat loss truly commence? Not merely water weight, glycogen depletion, or wishful thinking, but genuine fat reduction from your midsection. For most individuals adhering to a consistent caloric deficit, ensuring adequate sleep, managing stress, and maintaining stable insulin levels, that pivotal moment typically occurs between week 3 and week 6. This is the window where glycogen reserves remain low, hormones begin to cooperate, and metabolic flexibility becomes your new baseline. However, for many adults, particularly those with insulin resistance, a history of yo-yo dieting, or years of chronic stress, this transition can take longer. Some may not achieve true abdominal fat-burning mode until week 8, or even week 12. This shouldn't be interpreted as failure. It's simply your physiology adapting to patterns established over decades. Linda fits squarely into this category. She waited, experiencing self-doubt. Then one morning noticed her waist feeling subtly different. It wasn't a dramatic change, just a distinct, albeit understated, tightening. This is how abdominal fat reduction genuinely begins. Quietly, incrementally, and almost invariably later than people anticipate. The crucial element isn't speed, but consistent adherence, sustained long enough for your biology to internalize the signal. You won't awaken one morning to a suddenly flatter belly or a magically smaller waist. The fat-burning state doesn't announce itself with fanfare. It subtly, almost deferentially, integrates itself, altering how you feel long before it alters your appearance. One of the primary indicators is consistent, predictable energy. Instead of experiencing an afternoon slump or waking up disoriented, your body feels more balanced, as if the internal chaos has diminished and clarity has sharpened. Next, the cravings subside, or more accurately, their intensity lessens. The urgent desire for something sweet after dinner or that mid-morning snack attack begins to fade. Sugar no longer feels like an emergency. Hunger becomes calmer, more rational, less emotionally driven. Your body is no longer clamoring for quick glucose because it is learning to efficiently utilize fat in the background. Another shift manifests in your mood. Individuals report feeling more patient, focused, and less reactive. Sleep deepens. Waking up feels different. Less of a struggle, more of a true rejuvenation. While the scale may show minimal movement, your belt gradually fits more comfortably. Not dramatically, just subtly enough to be noticeable. These are the biological whispers indicating that your metabolism has crossed a crucial threshold. Your body is no longer merely seeking energy, it is actively generating it. Once these signals emerge, you are closer to visible transformation than you realize. Achieving a fat-burning state is a significant milestone, but sustaining it is where the real transformation unfolds. Your body doesn't just require a caloric deficit, it needs a consistent partnership. Once your metabolism learns to efficiently utilize fat, Your responsibility is to maintain an environment stable enough for this process to continue. And you don't need to strive for perfection. In fact, perfection often proves counterproductive. What yields results is establishing a rhythm your body can rely on. Sufficient protein to safeguard muscle, regular strength training to keep your metabolism active, evening walks to mitigate cortisol, and a sleep schedule your hormones can consistently depend on. And then, there's the unexpected revelation. Strategically indulging in slightly larger meals periodically can actually be beneficial. A day with a slightly elevated carbohydrate intake, frequently termed a refeed day, can rebalance leptin levels, alleviate cortisol, and signal to your metabolism that you are not undergoing starvation. Achieving fat loss isn't about imposing stricter regulations. Rather, it's about diminishing the apprehension your body harbors. Linda grasped this concept the instant she ceased meticulously counting every calorie, and instead prioritized a sustainable way of living. She didn't require an athlete's training regimen or a monk's diet. Merely sufficient consistency, around 80%, was enough to maintain her metabolism in a fat-burning state. When she embraced this, her progress didn't merely continue, it accelerated exponentially. This is the entire key. Once your habits become an integral part of your life, your fat-burning state becomes a default setting, not a fleeting, fortunate period. By the time you arrive at this stage of your journey, an internal shift occurs. You cease perceiving stubborn abdominal fat as a penalty and begin to comprehend it as a communication. Your body's protective mechanism, long before you contemplated making changes. And when you finally provide your biological system with the necessary duration, regularity, and security, your body responds in the only manner it knows how. Gradually at first, then subtly for a period, and subsequently quite suddenly, with undeniable, visible change. Fat loss was never a conflict against your own body. It was a dialogue with it. The moment you master its dialect through calmer hormonal cycles, more consistent sleep, improved physical activity, and a maintainable rhythm, that is when circumstances begin to transform. This occurs not because you exerted more effort, but because you synchronized with your metabolism's inherent operational design. Therefore, if you are currently immersed in this process, or if you have experienced frustration, or if you feel that no progress is being made, bear this in mind. You are not lagging, you are not defective, and you are not finished. You're at the juncture where most individuals abandon their efforts, precisely before their body finally releases its hold. Your significant advancement doesn't originate from sheer force. It stems from persevering long enough for your biology to catch up. If this narrative has assisted you in comprehending your body's internal workings, please press the like button. Share this with someone